The Golden State Warriors are looking for some help. After starting the season 12-3 and looking like legit contenders again after an offseason of additions along the margins, the Warriors' recent slump has made it clear that they need to add a star to this team to compete in the West. They already got a little bit of help by adding Dennis Schroeder, but they need much more. And honestly, they've known this since the offseason. Despite the fantastic start to the year, they were very aggressive this past offseason trying to add stars like Lauri Markkanen, Paul George. But now they're even more desperate. This is an extremely proud franchise that wants to do right by their star, their franchise cornerstone in Steph Curry, a guy they've had so much success with. They don't want him to not have a chance to compete for titles. And even though you could argue that at this point the Warriors are so far from contention that they should focus on the future, focus on the young guys, and maybe actually look at trading Steph, they're not going to do that. All the reports right now seem to indicate that they are going after somebody, but who? First, let's talk about the assets. The Warriors owe their 2030 first-round pick to Washington as part of the Chris Paul trade from 2 off-seasons ago, so they can trade 2 first-round picks, essentially 2025, 2027, or 2026, 2028. They also, of course, have a couple of young guys that could be interesting depending on the team. Jonathan Kaminga and Brandon Podziemski. I'm not counting Moses Moody in here because he signed an extension this past offseason and thus is not eligible to be traded this season. It also seems likely that Andrew Wiggins will be involved as a contract, assuming that they're not trading away Draymond, which I don't think they're trading away Draymond, and Wiggins' big contract number is going to be almost a necessity if they're trading for stars that are making $40 to $50 million. Now, the Kaminga situation here is especially interesting, and the bottom line for me is I would be shocked if Jonathan Kaminga is a Golden State Warrior after the trade deadline. They seem to have been showcasing him for the last month or so. Doesn't seem to be a fantastic fit on this team. They're clearly looking to upgrade that spot. And overall, the question is just going to be how much value can they get from him? Is this a Tyler Hero kind of situation where they value Kaminga way more than the rest of the league does? Or are their teams actually willing to trade away a star with Jonathan Kaminga as the focal point? You also have to account for the fact that there is a contract situation with him where he is still looking for an extension. And so that means that the Warriors would like to move him. And it also means the team trading for him needs to have plans long-term for Jonathan Kaminga to be a core piece. The other guy, Brandon Podziemski, I don't think is going to get moved just because it feels like selling very low on his value. They certainly value him more than other teams around the league do. And they've been stubborn about holding on to him even in some of those Paul George or Lauri Markkanen trade discussions, and his value has kind of bottomed out this season. He's not been very good at all, so it's likely they're going to keep him. In terms of who they're looking at, these are the rumors. Of course, you knew this one was coming. Jimmy Butler is certainly on the list for Golden State. Here is a possible trade where essentially it's Kaminga and some contracts and Wiggins in exchange for Butler and Josh Richardson. You can add some picks to that. You can add whatever you'd like to that. But Golden State certainly would like to explore a Jonathan Kaminga and some stuff trade in exchange for Jimmy Butler. This particular version is very interesting to the Heat because they could maybe flip Wiggins somewhere else, get some more value out of him, or keep him if they still feel like this collection of talent outside of Butler that they have could maybe still be semi-competitive in the Eastern Conference, and you get that long-term piece with Kaminga. Well, Golden State gets something that they've really been looking for. They've been looking for more of an on-ball perimeter player to play alongside Steph. Steph at this point in his career is not someone that you want creating and initiating everything for you. You want him as almost the secondary scorer, playmaker guy that elevates everyone else. And if you have Butler out there, obviously you need to mitigate some of the spacing issues that he provides, but he's an on-ball creator. He's tough. He can guard. He gives them size and a real star push for this team. Now, the counter is they've got to sign Jay Butler to an extension. This is one of his preferred destinations reportedly, so it seems like that would be pretty likely, but he's got a player option for the offseason. So if you're trading for Jimmy Butler, not only you're trading away Jonathan Kaminga and Andrew Wiggins, getting rid of a bunch of pieces in your rotation just to make the contracts work, but you're also committing to having Jimmy Butler on your team long term, and you are really going all in on this concept of how can we make sure that Steph has a couple more years of competing at the top of the Western Conference. If they wanted to go a little bit younger, Zach Lavine is another guy that certainly is out there for them right now. This construction is Wiggins again, who he just has to be in the deal. I don't think Golden State necessarily wants to trade Wiggins, but he's just one of the biggest contracts they have. And if they're trading for guys like Lavine and Butler that are making 40+ million, Wiggins kind of has to be in the deal. Gary Payton's there for a contract. Kyle Anderson's there for a contract. And Golden State's also giving up a first here because they're not giving up Kaminga as they were in the Butler deal. Obviously, the Zach Lavine contract is not great, but again, he fills that role of an on-ball creator, someone that can play alongside Steph. If you want to take the first-round pick off and you think that cap relief and having the big Lavine contract split up into smaller contracts for the Bulls is enough value for them, that's fine. But I think that at this point, Lavine's playing well enough that they might actually be able to get some draft compensation out of him. And again, we've already talked about why this would make sense for Golden State. Next up, though, I want to talk about my favorite Warriors trade. I don't think this is going to happen. We just talked about this in the last video. I don't think DeAaron Fox is going to get moved, or at least I wouldn't understand why Sacramento would want to trade away DeAaron Fox. The whole contract situation with him, it seems easily resolvable, but the vibes are definitely very, very, very bad in Sacramento. So what if Golden State was like, you know what? Let's do both. Let's add a star. Let's add someone that can play really well alongside Steph, but also let's make sure it's a young guy. Like, you don't have to go after someone like Jimmy Butler that's getting older and injury prone. Let's bring in DeAaron Fox, and it's okay if we give up a bunch of stuff. 2 firsts, Kaminga and Wiggins, that's a ton to give up for a guy that's only got 2 more years left on his deal, but that's the kind of deal that I think would make Sacramento sit up and kind of pay attention and say, oh, maybe this is actually the move that we need to make, even though they went into the year thinking they were going to contend, adding DeMar DeRozan. Maybe they're okay moving on for DeAaron Fox if they're getting Kaminga and some firsts, and then they can move the Wiggins contract later. Again, it is extremely unlikely, and I talked about that in the last video. I don't think DeAaron Fox is going to get moved just because there's no way you can convince me it's a good idea for Sacramento, but if you're Golden State, that's probably priority number 1 if you think he's actually available. Beyond that, you're getting into some riskier options here. You could do Zion Williamson from New Orleans. Again, Wiggins is in the deal. Kaminga's there, first round pick plus Lindy Waters. Obviously, this is a ton for Golden State for a guy in Zion that never plays. We did a whole video the other day talking about Zion's contract situation and why this might make sense for some teams trying to get out of some money. Maybe take a high risk, high reward kind of play here on Zion. The whole video, we've already talked about the Zion contract situation, and this is too much, frankly, for Golden State to be giving up, but maybe this is what it would take to get the Pelicans' attention. Maybe they're not at the point where they're just trying to give up Zion for nothing. A couple of other options that have been rumored, you could bring in someone like Nikola Vucevic to give you a little bit more of an offensive boost. Obviously doesn't fit that mold of the perimeter player like Lavine and Butler that they want to pair alongside Steph, but you could do Kyle Anderson, Kevon Looney, you could do Santos and a first. In this scenario, you're keeping Kaminga and you're keeping a first, so maybe if you still want to go out and get Lavine or Butler, you could do that, and you could bring in Vucevic depending on how the contracts work out. Then all of a sudden you've got a nice offensive team. You got spacing with Vucevic. If you bring in someone like Butler and you feel like you can't play Butler, Draymond, and a regular big all at the same time, you bring in Vucevic and try and make that work. And then the other piece that's been rumored a bunch as well is Kyle Kuzma. Similar kind of setup here to the Vucevic one, couple of contracts and a first, where Washington is just willing to get any kind of draft value they can out of Golden State, and they already have that 2030 first from Golden State as well in the future, so maybe they trade that back and can get a couple of extra picks for Kyle Kuzma, which frankly at this point I'm pretty sure every single Wizards fan would sign up for if they could get a first out of Kyle Kuzma. And really the problem for Golden State at this point is these options that I just went through in terms of rumors, in terms of realistic options, this is it. This is not a great trade deadline for adding big time star players unless it's Jimmy Butler or unless you count someone like Zach Lavine in that category, which is why they were so aggressive in the offseason. It's why they wanted Lauri Markkanen. It's why they wanted Paul George. Obviously, both of those guys are not available because Lauri signed the extension and Paul George already made his choice to be in Philly. But the Warriors feel like this team that has to make a move with their stated goal being they want to build a better contender around Steph. They can't have this roster going into the playoffs. They need more star power. And so they might end up reaching for someone like Jimmy Butler. They might end up reaching for someone like Zach Lavine, guys that are either injury prone or on big contracts or getting older. In Butler's case, maybe not as reliable as you'd want them to be in Lavine's case. And it's going to require shaking up the rotation in a significant way. If Wiggins is gone, if you're getting rid of someone like Kevon Looney, if you're getting rid of even someone like Kyle Anderson, Buddy Hield could be involved in these trades, Kaminga, this is a massive shift in roster construction as the Warriors do what, honestly, they probably should have done a couple of years ago, is they consolidate all these young players into a star. And at this point, the only reason this wouldn't happen, that Kaminga wouldn't be in a deal or they wouldn't be giving up first trying to bring somebody in, is just because they don't like their options, because they're not that big on Butler, they're not that big on Lavine, and they can't find anyone else. If DeAaron Fox becomes available, suddenly this gets much more interesting, but I think the Warriors are actively looking for help. They're going to get some help, but it might not be for some of those big names that they really want.